Welcome everybody. This is number 15, Ask the Stud. Wow, we really got it. We've done through, I guess, about 150 questions or so in this project, and it's been really, for me, very, very interesting and something I really enjoyed. And thank you all for your support and for coming back and joining us for another one. This one, I haven't seen the questions, but I'm sure they're going to be good, as always. And I'm looking forward to it. And so let's get her rolling. And here we go with Ask the Stud, number 15.
Our first question is from Tim Price, Kingman, Kansas. Good afternoon, Ron. Sam Muchnick was a longtime president of the NWA and has been credited with leading it successfully for many years. Bob Geigel took over for a couple of short terms. What does the Stud see as both gentlemen's success, and what was their downsides?
Great question. Hey, little Kansas, out of Kansas. Well, first of all, I know a great deal about Sam Muchnick, but I don't know a whole lot about Bob Geigel. I do know that Bob Geigel ran the Kansas City office, and I know that he and Sam had a great relationship, and I have a feeling that's kind of why when Sam gave it up, that Bob Geigel got to slide in there and take his place. I think that was probably because Sam was, as you said, you gentleman here that asked the question, was very successful, did a great job with running the National Wrestling Alliance for many years. One of the most respected guys in the history of the sport, no doubt about that. And I think that, when he turned the reins over to Bob Geigel, I believe that's because Kansas City wasn't that far from St. Louis, and Geigel was already doing a lot of things in St. Louis. He was there at all those shows. In '73 and '74, I worked there quite 40 times maybe, St. Louis, and the Geigel was usually at almost every one of those. So I think that that's why Geigel got in a situation where he became, for a short period of time, a couple of stints, as the National Wrestling Alliance president because of his relationship with Sam Muchnick. I can't say enough good things about Sam Muchnick. Sam was a great guy. He knew everybody in the business. He was friends with my grandfather, friends with my father. Just about all the promoters and the owners that I ever knew. They all looked up to Sam, and I did too. I was one of those guys. And Sam was a businessman, and everybody liked him. He had great control. When we went to the National Wrestling Alliance meetings, Sam had everything under control. He was very organized. He just did a tremendous job in that role, and really respected him. Like I said, I don't think Sam had any failures that I'm aware of. I know he did a whole lot of things before he got into wrestling, and I know he was a big wheel with the newspaper there in St. Louis. Loved the baseball team. He wouldn't even run in the summertime because he didn't want to run against the baseball team, which was, to me, best time of the year. I don't know how in the world he could go 9 months and then just drop out of it and not run at all during the summer because he admired the baseball team. He loved those Cardinals, and was a great guy. Bob, I can't say much about. Like I said, Bob Geigel, I never got a chance to work for him. I knew who he was. I mean, we always had nice conversations, but can't say much about Geigel, but I can't say enough about Sam Muchnick. He was just a tremendous human being, and like I said, I don't know, maybe the most respected man in the history of the National Wrestling Alliance.
Our next question is from Larry Jackson, Houston, Texas. What is one of your most memorable matches?
Wow. That's a pretty broad question there, Larry. Geez, I got to give that a little bit of thought here, man. I had probably 4,000 matches or more. So, gosh, the one that pops into my mind right away is the very first one I ever had. And I guess for a whole lot of reasons, really, this is a memorable match, an extremely memorable match. I was playing basketball, University of Miami, 1968. I think it was my first year at Miami. I didn't want to wrestle because I was afraid that I was going to get caught wrestling, which was a professional sport and getting paid, and that I was going to lose my scholarship to the University of Miami. But my old man just insisted. He goes, "Ron, I want to get you in the ring this summer, And I weighed about 240 then, I guess, and I was 6'9", and so he said, "I'll get you booked in Blytheville, Arkansas." And we lived in Atlanta, Georgia. So, I was like, well, that sounded like a pretty small little town and, quite a ways away, and, maybe that was going to be pretty safe. So when I went to wrestle with my dad, we wrestled in a tag team match. My grandfather, Roy, it was my first match. And my grandmother and my great-grandmother all they drove from Yorkville, Tennessee, across the Mississippi River. You had to cross the river on a ferry. There was no bridge between Memphis and Louisville back in those days. So you crossed on a ferry, and so me and Dad crossed on the ferry. Herb Welch was there, my granddad's brother. I mean, it was like a family affair in a way. And so when we got to the town, we were wrestling against Don Carson and a masked guy. I think they called him the Red Shadow, but he was Dick Dunn. So it was Don Carson and Dick Dunn. I mean, you couldn't have two better guys to start out your first match with than those two guys, and they'd been in business for a long time. I remember we were separated in a dressing room and had a little hole in the window in the wall where you could just stick your face in and talk to whoever was in the other dressing room. And I remember one time Don Carson came, and they were looking at me and they were looking at Dad, and I could hear them have conversations with my dad, but I wasn't really paying a lot of attention. And finally Don Carson came to the window and he said, "Hey, Ron, come here. And I came over and he says, hey, how long have you been wrestling? I said, "Oh, he's been wrestling Dad started training me to wrestle about 8 years old. And I think I was probably 18, 19 at that point." And he said, "No, I mean working." And I said, "Oh, no, it's my first time to work." And he was like, oh, his head dropped down. Oh my God. He looked over there at Dick Dunn, and he says, "He never worked, he never had a match." And then, here he went. He just took off. That was the end of the conversation. So my grandma and my great-grandma, Roy, my granddad, got him a seat in the first row, real close to the ring. And it was, they were only 5 feet away from the ring. And so we got into the match, and Don Carson got a hammerlock on me. And then we were on the far side of the ring, and my grandma, he knew my grandma and my great-grandmother. He'd met them before. So he got a hammerlock on me, and he drugged me over to where he was right there by the ropes, right next to him, where he could talk to him, basically, And he was cranking that arm up my back, and I'm selling it, and that's my first match, and that's all that I could do was sell it. And he says, "What do you think, Grandma?" He said, I'm going to break it. And oh boy, man, she's screaming, man. And my great-grandma, she's screaming. I'm like, oh, and I'm screaming too. I'm selling. And then he couldn't get enough. He cranked it up a little bit, and he let me up, and he took the arm, bang, and he drugged me over there again. And here he went again on him. Boy, I can't wait. I'm going to kill this boy. I'm going to kill this boy right here in this ring. And finally, my grandma couldn't take any more of it. And she jumped up out of her seat. And my great-grandma, too. My great-grandma was probably 95 years old. And they both came right to the ringside. I mean, they almost had their face right next to Don. He's about a foot away, foot and a half. Grandma, you better sit down now, damn it. No. You know, he was just really giving them heck. And here comes the cops. Now, I don't think the cops knew who they were. And the cops, got him by the arm. They come on, and then they wanted to go back and sit down. No, they took him out. And so I kind of looked over there in the corner in the building, and I see Roy back there, and he's snickering, right? He sees what's going on, but he sees the cop take him out the front door, and here he goes. So I figure, well, you got to go out there and take care of business. You got to get him off, whatever. And so that was basically my first match, man, that I ever had. I remember it was 2 out of 3 falls, and we went the whole 3 falls, and I can't remember what the finishes were, but those 2 guys, ended up working with those guys so many times. That was probably 1968, 1973. The 3 of us were in Australia together for 3 months. And I'd become a worker by then and getting to be pretty good. And wow. We had some great matches. I always had great matches with him, and then everybody knows, if you've seen Southeastern, you know the history of Don Carson and Dick Dunn and Tarzan Baxter were the superstars for me in 1975 in Knoxville when I had my first year going. So I had a great relationship with those guys all my life, but that was a pretty memorable match. My grandma and my great-grandma got arrested, and Don Carson had a field day, and I didn't hurt anybody.
Our next question is from Russell Bell, Dyer, Tennessee. I have a question. Why would modern wrestling do away with a good heel manager? I remember how a good manager can make the crowd madder than the wrestlers in the ring.
Well, Russell, that's a great point. I got to be honest, and everybody watches me and watches these things, and I realize I don't watch much of today's stuff, so I really don't know. I can't imagine they got rid of managers, though, man. That doesn't make any sense much to me, because I totally agree with you. I mean, some of the guys that had the most heat in the history of wrestling were the managers, and boy, when you start to think about all the great ones there were, I mean, it's just amazing. Gosh, geez, the ones that I dealt with were just so great, man. And, everybody and managers were characters. I mean, you had Dandy Jack Crawford that used to manage Buddy Colt way back in the 70s, early 70s and the late 60s. And, Homer Odell, man, with the dang pit helmet on, and he was managing Norvell Austin and Butch Malone. That's my first Southeastern Tag Team Champions, managed by Homer Odell. And Homer was just horrified of the crowd. He was horrified of riots. I mean, and I can think of so many situations where Homer was going crazy. I remember somebody on one night, he was walking the apron and working the apron, and he had his pit helmet on, and I saw a guy come running from the top of the bleachers. I watched him run all the way down, and he dived on Homer's back, and he was a big old boy too, probably weighed close to 300 pounds, and Homer screamed. You could hear him 3 miles away. And he reached back and tried to grab the guy and tried to drag him off his back. Oh, get him, somebody get him. He's talking to Norvell. Get him, somebody get him. you know, he's going to get me, he's going to get me. I guess he thought he had a knife or whatever. I mean, so many situations in which you had the managers, and they always had heat. I mean, you had guys that were so good at it. And Carson did it great. Gorgeous George Jr. did it great. Oh, man. I don't know, Russell. I mean, you got a heck of a point. And, you know, and you're from over there in the west side of Tennessee, in Dyer, Tennessee, pretty close to Dyersburg, where I was born, as a matter of fact. And, wow, they had some great managers there. Oh, son of a gun, man. Steve Clements, Sir Clements, and, oh, just an amazing, amazing group of managers. I can't picture the sport being what the sport was, man, without managers. I mean, every territory had at least one. You know, back in the day, and some had two. If it's a big territory, they'd have two managers. Good question. I mean, I kind of agree with you. How in the world can anybody run a wrestling company without managers, or with the band to have one or two, and you know, in those big companies like that, and as many wrestlers as they have available to them. And I think probably the reason they don't have them is because they can't talk. And you know, that's what managers did. That's how they got their heat. You know, they got their heat by what they said, and they did the talking for their team. You know, so many great managers that had so much heat, man. I think probably managers one of the few people in the sport that got hurt bad, because fans had a feeling that they hated them more than the wrestler, just like you said, Russell. They hated them worse than they did the wrestlers, and they were always smaller than the wrestlers, so they got jumped on. Heck, I was a manager, but I didn't have a problem with people jumping on me because I was bigger than the wrestlers most of the time that I was managing. But wow, it's a great question, Russell. I can't explain it for you, but I can tell. And I've not been around the business lately and what's going on in it anymore. I don't know how the heck they do it and why they do it, but they must be doing it.
Our next question is from John K. Hanley. Prior to purchasing the Knoxville promotion from John Kazana, had you spent much time as an adult in East Tennessee? Was the area and its beauty a bigger decision factor than the promotion itself?
John, I'm back in Tennessee, man. I guess that kind of answers that. You know, first time I remember coming to the eastern side of Tennessee, I was a senior in high school, and I was being recruited by some colleges to play basketball, and the University of Tennessee flew me from Atlanta up to Knoxville, and I got off. Well, I fell in love with it, John, with coming in on the plane, looking out the window, and I saw those Smoky Mountains over there, and wow, I was like, look at that, man, that's beautiful. And so I spent 2 days in Tennessee on that trip, and wow, I fell in love with it. So, you know, when I got to thinking about, and then I really fell in love with it, is I brought my family in about 1973. I took a vacation, and it was my first vacation since starting wrestling, and I spent 4 or 5 days, and I came to Knoxville. I remembered that trip in 1960, in the 60s, when I was being recruited to play ball in college, and I remembered how pretty it was. I spent 4 or 5 days there at that time, and gosh, it was like, wow, I want to live here, you know? I mean, then I luckily sat down in the hotel room the last night I was there, and I turned on the TV, and by golly, there was wrestling. And it was Big Jim Hess, walk your head off, ho, Big Jim Hess, and Ron Wright, and wow, I was like, son of a gun, man. And I mean, it was the worst TV show I'd ever seen, you know. And I was coming out of Florida, where man, it was Gordon Soley, and I mean, really, really well done. And this was something totally different. I was like, son of a gun, man. I wonder if how long they've been doing it like this, you know. And so then I ended up making the deal with John Kazana to buy it, and I ended up in Knoxville. But you know, I'm kind of torn between the answer to your question there. You know, I wanted to own my own wrestling company, but wow, I mean, if I was going to own my own wrestling company, this was the place to do it, is what I thought, man. This is the most beautiful part of the country, and you know, and I have gone back and forth, starting in 1973. First time I came, I went back to Florida, then I came back to Tennessee, I went back to Florida, you know, and now I spent the last 20 years before about 2021, I came back. I'd spent 20 years in Florida on that occasion, living in the Tampa area. Building an ADT company of all things. But I never lost my love for Eastern Tennessee. And I still got it today. I live here today, and I'm as happy as I can be. It to me is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I've been to a lot of places on earth. I've had a great life, been really blessed. I've seen a lot of places, but Eastern Tennessee is just about as good as it gets.
Our next question is from Jeffrey Archie, Cleveland, Tennessee. In listening to the Studcast, I noted you used video from Knoxville days to set up feuds in Gulf Coast. Was there an angle from Knoxville that did not go over well in Gulf Coast? If not, which angle had a bigger pop in Gulf Coast than it did in Knoxville? Thank you for your time.
Well, great question. Wow. You know, there was a period of time, we didn't do a whole lot of things from Knoxville that we brought down south. I mean, video-wise, certainly, very few things because we didn't need it. We did bring down some stuff in 1980, probably about 1980 when I sold Knoxville. We had some of the same guys working in the Gulf Coast at that time that had been in Knoxville, and so we utilized some of that video, very little of it. But one of the things, I think your question was what really got over and what didn't get over. I don't remember anything that we did and showed that didn't get over, and I don't remember hardly any angles that we worked that we had done in Knoxville that didn't do well. Right now, in the time frame I'm in right now with the present day Studcast, Bob Armstrong has been beaten by the Mongolian Stomper in the Loser League town. He's been out of the territory for 3 months, and he comes back as the Georgia Jawjacker. And wow, we did the same thing in Knoxville. That's one of those that we did in Knoxville that I knew was going to be successful. And Bob Armstrong could make anything successful. He was so good at all of it. So, that we did, that one got over just like it did in Knoxville. Maybe even a little better than it did in Knoxville. The one thing I can think of offhand that got over better, definitely better than in Knoxville, is Joe LeDuc pulling the bus. And the reason that got over better is when we had Joe pull the bus in Tennessee, we weren't smart enough to get a crowd there. And we just had him pull the bus by himself. So it didn't get that really good reaction. But when we did it in Dothan, we did it in a better fashion. We had the We did it on a television day. We did it prior to the TV show when the fans were there. We took them out of the studio and into the grass out there beside the television station where we recorded that, and we had Joe pull the bus in front of all those people. And wow, those people were so into it. Heck, it was hard not to get into it. Have you ever seen a guy pull a bus with just a little helmet on his head, and tied it to the front of the bus and pull that bus? It's an amazing deal. And the week before, we had him pull had a tug of war. Joe LeDuc had a tug of war in Knoxville with 20 guys, 10 guys on each side. And he just connected his hands, and he couldn't pull his hands apart. And but we did it in a wrestling ring, and we did it without the crowd. And so when we did it in Dothan, we pulled the people out of the studio, and we had a crowd out there. Got a big, huge reaction again. So we did so many things in Gulf Coast that we never did in Knoxville. That would have been great in Knoxville too. Would have sold out. It would have made that territory even stronger too. Turning Bob Armstrong heel, and me and my stud stable. I mean, we had a lot of things that Knoxville never got to see, and there were a lot of things that the Gulf Coast people didn't get to see that we did in Knoxville. But we did utilize that some, and mostly in about early 1980. And then as time went on, we got away from doing angles that we'd done before, because, to be honest with you, we were coming up with some tremendous angles. I mean, we'd been in the business at that point. I'd been in that business running my own company for 7 years, about 7 years, and wow, my brain was cranking out stuff, man, big time. And I'd ride down the road, me and Bob, and we'd be talking about ideas, and wow, we were doing stuff that nobody did before, and nobody's ever done since either. And wow, just filling buildings everywhere we went. But thank you very much for your question. It's a very good one, and I hope I explained it.
Our next question is from Jerry Kitchen, Birmingham, Alabama. When you had the Continental Championship Wrestling in Birmingham, it was great. My friend and I went every Monday to Boutwell. My question is, when CCW was sold to, I believe, the Memphis Group and became CWA, what was the reason for the sale? I thought CCW was as good as WCW and WWF during this time. Thanks for all the studcasts and the short rides.
Well, thanks, Jerry, for the compliment about WCW and WWE. Being as good as those two companies, both those companies were great, excellent companies, no doubt about it. But we didn't sell. We did not sell the company to the Memphis company, and Memphis was using some Continentals. They were calling themselves Continental something, and I don't know really what the name was. But we sold the Continental CCW company to a television station owner in Montgomery, Alabama, and he changed the name to Continental Wrestling Federation. That's probably where you got confused with Memphis. And he brought in Eddie. Eddie, a really good booker out of Memphis territory, and there was a connection there always between us and Memphis because we called ourselves Continental Championship Wrestling, and I think they changed their name to whatever, but they used the word Continental as well in their name. So yep, we were, and the reason we sold was, to be quite honest, we at that point, and I think your name was Jerry. I'd been a promoter and owned my own company since 1974. I'd been wrestling since 1970. We sold it in 1987, late '87, and I was really, I'd kind of burned out on wrestling. I mean, had a lot of great years, and we'd run a lot of great shows, and we'd had 3 territories at that time. I'd already had 3 territories, and I just and we had sold the company to a stockbroker, a group of stockbrokers out of Atlanta, Georgia. This was 1987, the fall of 1987. And I don't know if anybody goes, everybody, you got to be fairly old to remember back this far, but there was a huge crash of the stock market in the fall of 1987. 2 weeks after we sold to this company, the stock market crashed. I mean, it didn't just fall abruptly. It basically crashed in 1987. And the guys that we had sold the company to sent our books back to us and our everything back to us. They could not go through with the deal. So we ended up selling to this gentleman named Woods, David Woods, who his father had been in the business. He had a television station in Dothan. David owned a TV station in Montgomery. They may have owned more stations. I think probably his father owned more stations than David did. But David Woods, great guy, and he had an hankering to become a wrestling promoter, and that's how he got his hands on Continental Wrestling, and he changed the name from Continental Championship Wrestling. Don't blame him. We had sold the company to Continental Wrestling Federation, and and that's kind of the history of that. Great question though, and I really appreciate it.
Our next question is from Barry Barclay, Wollongong, Australia. I know you were here in Australia in 1973. Did you ever wrestle in Wollongong?
Well, I love that Aussie. The only place in the world probably you can have a city named Wollongong. It'd be in Australia. Oddly enough, I did wrestle in that town. It's really crazy, and it was most unusual because when you wrestled in Australia, you wrestled in the whole country. It was like the size of the United States, and every week you worked, and you would wrestle in New Orleans. Basically, Adelaide was like being in New Orleans, and Brisbane was like being in Washington, D.C. the next night, and then you'd go down to Melbourne, which would be like Miami, whereas Miami is, and then you were just back in, and then up north, it was just you were flying cross country all the time. But I actually lived in Sydney, just outside of Sydney, and I lived in Cronulla. And oddly enough, we spoke about this earlier in the program, earlier in this one about wrestling against Don Carson and Dick Dunn, and they were in Australia and lived in the same apartment complex where I lived in Cronulla. And we got booked one night in a town called Wollongong, and I remember us seeing the sheet, the sheet for the town, and every once in a while you'd get one of these small towns. And I remember Carson came and said, "Ron, you ever heard of Wollongong?" And I thought, what in the heck kind of name is Wollongong? And then I got to asking around somebody, and they said, "Ron," they go, "the 3 most beautiful beaches in Australia are in Wollongong." And I was like, wow, I love the beach. We live right on the beach, man. They're right there in Australia. I mean, up on the cliff, and you could look down on wow, what a beautiful country that country is. Just a magnificent country. So there's Wollongong, and so the 3 of us ride together to Wollongong, and I'll never forget it. It was a racetrack, And it didn't have wasn't a paved track, but it was a dirt track. I don't know what they did, ran horses on it or what the track was for, but that's where the matches was. And it was built up on the side of a cliff, probably, 1,000 feet maybe off of the actual beach, and you could see the beach down below, and then the Pacific. And I remember that night specifically because it was a full moon. And I came out of the dressing room and I saw a sight that it was the most magnificent, beautiful sight. I'll never forget it. And I'm glad you asked this question, gentleman from Wollongong, because it brings me back to walking out of that dressing room, and it had become dark, and the full moon was sitting way out there above the ocean, and there was a trail of white from the moon that just came right straight up to the ring, it looked like. Moonlight. It was awesome. I was freaked out. I've never seen anything as beautiful as this. And the ocean down there and the waves crashing, and you had a lot of waves in that country. You had great surf. That country had great surf. They were on the Pacific Ocean, and I remember that night that Carson and Dunn were in the main event, and somehow they had a long match. I don't remember if it was an hour and it went through an hour or whatever, but anyway, Don Carson blew up. He blew up really badly. And it's so bad that you had to climb these steps to get up to where the dressing rooms were, and he couldn't make it. And Dunn couldn't get anybody to help him, to help him carry him, and then finally found a couple of guys, and instead of them getting underneath his arms and carrying him up the steps. I remember being at the top of the steps and watching him try to get him up, and they had a problem getting him up like that, and he finally laid down on his belly, and they grabbed, one guy got 1 foot, and one guy got a foot, and the two guys in the front got his hands, and his belly was dragging the stairs, coming up the stairs. Belly was dragging the stairs, and they were carrying him up there, and I was laughing at the top. And Dick Dunn was carrying him, and he saw me laughing up there, and he started cracking up too. It was pretty funny. But Wollongong. So that's my thoughts of Wollongong. I gotta say though, it was one of the most magnificent. I will never forget it. It was never anywhere near duplicated, that particular type of scene.
Our next question, we have managed to leave the name off of our list, but you will know your question when you hear it. Austin Idol has a reputation for missing bookings over money. You always talk well of Idol. Did you ever have any of those issues with him? And what's your overall thoughts on Idol? Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know who you are, sir, but like I said, that's a great way to. You will recognize your question here. So, Austin Idol. Austin Idleman and I go back, before I ever started wrestling, to probably maybe my last year in college at University of Miami. And Austin Idol is from Tampa, Florida. Went to Robinson High School with Mike Graham, where he went to school. Several other wrestlers came out of that little school there. They had a great wrestling team. And his real name was Dennis McCord, still is Dennis McCord. Dennis didn't become Austin Idol until he was 4 or 5 years into his career. He started out as Dennis McCord, and he did not look anything like Austin Idol looks today. He was over 300 pounds. He was a big muscled up weightlifter. And and he couldn't move around the ring too good because his size. He was just really, really big. He was having a struggling, and so he was in Australia with me. There again, he was in that same crew. We're back to Australia again. He was in Australia with me, and he was Dennis McCord, and still weighed over 300 pounds. And then I didn't see him anymore for 2 years after that, almost 2 years after 73, 1975. I end up in the dressing room with him, and I'm sitting next to him, and I have no idea who he is. Honestly, he's got blonde hair, dyed blonde hair. He had black hair. He had dyed blonde hair. He had a great body, whoever this guy was. I'm sitting there beside him thinking, who is this guy? He got a heck of a body. And after him sitting there next to me, and I guess he was waiting on me to acknowledge him, and I didn't know him. Right? And he finally said, are you going to say something to me? And I was like, I don't know you. And he goes, yeah, you don't know me? What do you mean you don't know me? He goes, you've known me for 10 years. And I said, well, who are you? And he says, I'm Dennis McCord. And I was like, well, what is your name now? And he said, I'm Austin Idol. And I go, are you kidding me? You can't be Dennis McCord. And I was like, it blew me away. So, I had to throw that in because, it was really unusual. He not only changed his body, he changed his style of work in the ring. He changed his interviews. He morphed into a different human being than what he had been in his early part of his career. And I know, he had a horrible reputation, and he was always kind of a cocky guy, to be honest with you. Even when he was Dennis McCord, he was a cocky guy. And so he had problems with promoters, and I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but there were a lot of guys that had problems with promoters, and they were difficult. And I've heard all the types of things and stories about him, but when he never came to work for me until 1975. I'm talking about there. He didn't come to work for me. He didn't come to work for me until about 1981, and he called and says, Ron, I'd like to come and work in Pensacola in your territory. And so I said, sure, Dennis, heck yeah, come on, man. And, because once I'd seen him as Austin Idol, I was like, well, maybe he's a dude. I'd really never seen his work. And between a few times I saw him wrestle in Memphis, because I was on some of those same cards, I realized that he was a different talent and he was a heck of a lot better. Anyway, I never ever had a single crossword with Austin Idol. Never, ever, of any kind. I mean, he never complained about anything. He went to the ring every night and did his job. And I hear these stories about him, he didn't like this money or whatever it was, and I had promoters, guys that ran territories, and they said, do you ever deal with Austin Idol? I said, yeah. Well, do you have a problem? No, I never had a problem with Dennis McCord. I know him for many, many years, long before he was Austin Idol. No, I never had a problem with Austin Idol. And I always thought he never missed a shot for me. He never, ever quibbled or complained about an angle or anything that I asked him to do. He was just right there. Absolutely, Ron. Whatever you want. And I got nothing bad to say about Austin Idol. Friends to this very day. I still talk to him every once in a while. And he's always managed to make himself money. He's always managed somehow to get into good companies and to manage to keep his head above the water. And to me, Austin Idol is a quality guy.
Our next question is from William Aarons, Muncie Valley, Pennsylvania. Hey Stud, I never knew Mr. Fuji wrestled so often for you until I started listening to your Studcast. Fuji had a notorious reputation as a ribber in other territories. Did he pull off any good ribs in Southeastern? And what are some of the better ribs you've seen or heard of during your career?
Oh, wrestling business is a great business for ribs, man. Well, and I think it was way back even better. I mean, guys, it kind of got to where you didn't rib so much anymore than what they did back in the old days. I love Fuji. Fuji was a great worker. Fuji, I tagged him with Toru Tanaka, and talk about a great Japanese team. Wow, those son of a guns, man, were a tremendous team together. I really, really love their work. I gotta admit, I don't know an incident of a Fuji rib. And and when you own a company, you don't get ribbed as much as guys that are just regular workers, so. Maybe that's why I never got a rib or never heard much about Fuji ribbing anybody. But you ask about a rib, and I had one that comes to mind, man, that's really, really unusual. And this goes way, way back, really, really far back, back into my grandfather's day and his brother Herb. And we're probably talking about maybe 1940s, late 40s or early 40s, early 50s at the latest. And they got a guy that works in the crew that's kind of henpecked, and his wife, she don't want him to go. She tells him you got to be home at a certain time, and you got to do this and you got to do that. And Roy and Herb were kind of rowdy. I mean, they weren't that tight, man. They sure didn't have their wife tell them what to do anyway. So they want to put a rib on him. So they told him, they said, we're going across the river. They were going across the Mississippi River. You had to go on a ferry, and they said, we're going across the river there tonight, and we want you to ride with us. We never get to spend any time with you in one of those deals. And so the guy says, oh, no, I don't know. My wife, I got to be home at a certain time, and what time y'all think you'll be back? Oh, we'll be back. We'll bring you back early. We'll see to it you get home early. And the guy says, I don't know now. I got to talk to my wife. Well, go in there, and talk to her. Tell her we want you to ride with us. So he comes back and he goes, what time y'all gonna get me here? He wants to know what time we're gonna be back. And they said, well, I think it was, they was across the river, and you had to ride a ferry, and you had to take the ferry back. And so, they said, midnight. We'll be back here at midnight. And so the guy went and told her, and so he came back, brought his bag, put it in the car. Yeah, I'm gonna ride with you guys. I always want to ride with you guys too. So they get across the river and they work the show. And at the end of the show, the guy's saying, "Are you looking at his watch? We gotta go. And we're gonna run. They got these girls over here. We're gonna go down here and have a little drink down here." And no, we got to go. We got to go. We got to go. No, we got to go. So he's like, oh, geez, no, I didn't know what. Come on, you're with us. So he gets in the car and they go hang out for about 30 minutes or an hour. And they drink a little bit, and the guy finally has a beer or two. And, so then he says, We gotta go now. We gotta be an hour late, you know. And well, we got a friend here. We gotta stop off here and see old Fry. Every time we come here, and they stop off and spend about another 20 minutes, another 30 minutes with another guy that's a friend of theirs, right? Killing time. And the guy's like, oh, he's coming, pounding on it. All right, we gotta go. We get this. So they get in the car, and so they get to the river, and then the ferry comes across. The ferry's on the far side. It takes a long time for the ferry to get over, and they drive the car up on the ferry, and then they get off. And he's distraught. Oh God! And so he's up in the front seat with Roy. Roy's driving, and the guy's sitting in the front seat, and Herb's in the back. So Herb takes a tube of lipstick out. The girl gave him a tube of lipstick, and he takes the lipstick and he puts it inside this finger, and then he puts it on this finger here. And the guy's got his shirt on, and so Herb's ribbing him, and he laughing, telling him a joke and all that. And he says, "Oh, that's good, ain't it, boy?" And he reaches up there and he gets a hold of him, and he puts a little spot on his neck right there, right? And then he's laughing, and the guy's kind of laughing. Oh God, oh, the guy's worried. Oh, come on. So then he does it to him 3 or 4 times. Reaches up, gets his shirt. One time gets the lipstick on his shirt, and then they pull up in front of the house, and the guy just as soon as they pull up she flips the light on the inside. She's been waiting on him, right? And he goes, no. And so they go back and they open the trunk, and he gets his bag out of the trunk, and he don't want to hardly leave. And Roy gets the bag out, and Herb stays in the car. And so Herb rolls his window down, and he lets the guy get almost to the house, and he's laying down in the back seat, and he kind of sticks his head up where his wife can't see him, and he goes, "We had a great time, honey. Hope to see you again." And they got in the car and they drove off. Well, they said, man, the next day, the guy was so mad. He said, "We're going to get a divorce. She's going to divorce me." So, they played some pretty heavy-duty ribs back in those days. It was a part of the business, man. In those days, it was part of being a wrestler. And if you couldn't take a rib, you were really in trouble. And if you liked a rib, wow, it was wonderful. I mean, stuff was going on all the time. And it was always good. I never tried to curtail that. I had a lot of it in the dressing rooms, and I always loved it because it meant that everybody's making money. When your boys are happy and they're ribbing each other, they're happy, and because the money's good. And but great. I'm glad you brought that one up for me, because I hadn't really thought of that story in many, many years. But wrestlers were big rivers. I don't know that Fuji was. I never got to experience one of Fuji's ribs, but I kind of wish I had, because I love those ribs myself.
Our next question is from Aaron Dyke. What was the right mix in a territory for homesteaders? I knew a good territory always had new talent coming in and going out, but how many homesteaders could a given territory support without seeming stale to the fans?
Wow, that's a great question, Aaron. Sounds like you're in the wrestling business or something, man. To know something about that type of thing. I had a few homesteaders. I think every promoter, every owner of a company had homesteaders, and that meant they were guys that were, for one thing, really good, draw you money, and it was, you wanted those type of guys in your territory, and you wanted to keep them there for just about as long as you could. And I had a few homesteaders, Mongolian Stomper what I guess would be a homesteader. He came to me in 1976, and he never left. I mean, it was like he stayed with Knoxville until we went to Gulf Coast, and then he came to Gulf Coast, and he stayed in Gulf Coast for probably 3 or 4 years. So, Bob Armstrong. Bob Armstrong started out, came to me in 75, 76, and wow, one of the greatest talents in the business. I mean, I was so happy to have him in the crew. And you don't want to send a guy like that out of your crew because you may never get him back. So it wouldn't have been smart. And he ended up owning part of the second business we had. So, I couldn't consider him a homesteader at that point. He was one of the people that was there. Joe LeDuc. Joe LeDuc was... I'd have kept Joe LeDuc for 4 or 5 years if I could have kept him there, that way. So yeah, I had homesteaders. Like I said, every territory did. You get a really good guy in your company that is business, and he's drawing your money, and he's happy as he can be, and he don't want to leave. It's hard to want him to leave. You got to be, you want to keep some guys. You just want to keep some guys because they just, they deserve it. And, and guys had to move around. Wrestlers moved here and there, from this territory to that territory, from Oregon to Florida, from Florida to Minnesota. It was, it was a hard business for wrestlers. And so when you had a guy that was a good talent and he came to you, and you'd keep him. You'd basically keep him as long. And I never, I would keep him, but I would always tell him, after 3 or 4 years, when you go and tell somebody after 3 years, I think you need to take a break out of here. It's pretty hard. And so I never pushed that to any definitive time frame. You got to be gone for 2 years. I had a couple of guys that were really, really good, and I really wanted to keep them, but they did need to have a change, and you didn't want to have stale territory. It's a good way of putting it to you. You didn't want to have the same guys week after week, and people quit coming. But I think the great way to judge when to let somebody go, a homesteader, is when your territory goes down. And gosh, mighty, good Lord bless me, I don't remember having a territory that went down. They just kept good, and they were staying good, and they get better and better. And I mean, I think it's a great question. I mean, I don't know that there's any definite answer. My way of doing it is if I had the right guy, I'd keep him. And it didn't make any difference how long it was for. I wanted to keep him as long as he would stay. And and I don't know other territories, how they did their business, but that's the way I did mine. And what a great question, though, Aaron. You got to be in the wrestling business in some form or fashion to understand the significance of that. I had a few homesteaders, and the Austinite, he stayed a long time with me. Once he finally came, he didn't want to leave. I mean, and that's always a good thing when you have wrestlers that don't want to leave. You're doing something right.
Our next question is from Glenn Centers, Pikeville, Kentucky. To my knowledge, the NWA, AWA, or WWF never had a masked world champion. Can you discuss your thoughts on that? I know we have had several popular masked men such as Mil Mascaras, Mr. Wrestling 2, and of course, the Tennessee Stud.
That's a great question, Glenn. Mass world champions. I didn't realize for a long time that that was a rule with the NWA. I didn't know it was a rule with the AWA because I'd never been in the AWA and I hadn't worked up north in the Northeast. And I don't really know the reason for that being the case. Especially, I've wrestled Mil Mascaras in Japan, great wrestler. I've wrestled Mr. Wrestling too, great wrestler. Some mass wrestlers were good enough. No doubt they were good enough to be the world champion. So I don't know where that rule came from, and I don't know how it got started. And if I'd have been world champion, I probably wouldn't have wanted to be a mass world champion. I would have wanted as my real name and as who I am. I would have preferred that for sure. But I have one story about that since you brought that up, and it's the only time I ever knew of a masked man beating the world champion, going to be the world champion, the world heavyweight champion, and that was with Dusty Rhodes in Florida. It must have been somewhere in probably the 80s, I think. And Dusty was the booker, and Dusty was always a crazy dude. I mean, he was kind of off the wall, man. You could never tell where Dusty was going, and I believe he had some kind of angle in which he had become a masked wrestler. And probably he had to lose or leave town, somebody beat him, he came back as the Midnight Rider. And if there's anybody that would wear a mask that you would recognize instantly, that it can't be anybody better than Dusty Rhodes. I mean, Dusty, there was nobody had a body like Dusty's. And so I can't imagine that, there he was wrestling Ric Flair, and somehow, I don't know, knowing Dusty, I'm sure he probably didn't call or talk to anybody in Sam Muchnick or whoever was running the NWA at that point and say, I'm thinking about beating Flair with my mask on as the Midnight Rider. I'd like to have been in the office in the NWA when that call came in. And if they told me this is Dusty Rhodes, I said, oh, okay, I understand now why that could happen. But anyway, Dusty beat Ric Flair as the Midnight Rider. And I don't think he told anybody because it blew up. I mean, it's like, wow, as soon as they found out, and why Flair didn't know is beyond me too. And knowing Dusty, he probably talked Flair into it, hey, they won't care, it's no big deal. Anyway, they just, I remember hearing the scuttlebutt about, boy, big deal went on down there in Miami someplace that Dusty Rhodes wearing a mask as a Midnight Rider beat Flair for the title. And you can't have a world champion with a mask on in the NWA house. And I remember I didn't know that, but I never thought about it, so there's in all my memory and what I know about the business, the only mask world champion that I ever knew was the Midnight Rider, Dusty Rhodes, and by golly, Dusty, I'm sure you wore that mask, and you might have took that belt to the ring a couple of times that week before they jerked it off of you, man. What a great question.